Huddle up, sports.
Dermatologist, pure retinol is the
kill themselves.
The Diane Sawyer Special, tonight on ABC.
Catch Dakota News Now at 9 on Fox Sioux Falls. It's news when you want it.
Before we go, here's another look at our evening planner. First of all, for Sioux Falls, it's clear, a lot of sunshine, but not very warm. Only 15 down to -1 by midnight. Meanwhile, for Aberdeen, a lot of sunshine for you as well. Also cold, 13. You'll also be down to about -1 by midnight. And in Pierre right now, a lot of sun for you as well. Only 18 down to 6 later on tonight. Warmer weather starts to work its way in for tomorrow, and it sticks around for several days.
Looking forward to it. Thanks, Phil. World News Tonight is next here on KSFY.
Dakota News Now does continue in 2 minutes. We will see you at 5:30 over on KDLT. Have a good night and a great weekend, everyone.
The First Alert Weather Team helps you plan and prepare for the next big thing. The next big thing, only on Dakota.
That the Ukrainians have.
Yeah, and speaking of those armaments, Mac, it seems like Ukraine has a bit of a secret weapon. It may not be a secret to many, but we don't hear much about it. We've seen video showing Turkish combat drones striking the Russian army. So how important are they? How effective are they? And can they themselves do?
Deep flat hands, stump feet, dancing to this robot beat. I want to move like a robot. Lip lock, move like a robot. Lip lock, stop.
You would find at your local airport. But the important difference is, like you mentioned, they're built in Turkey. The airframes they've got a lot of the guts, the electronics, and the engines from other parts of the world. But it's actually an interesting story. It's an MIT grad who's a engineer, started a company there, and that's who's building these. So he did sell them. Ukraine had some before this, but he has recently delivered some more. Now, I think that's to the chagrin of Russia, but they're very well equipped. They're equipped. They've got radar, laser targeting, they can have laser bombs, and you can load up 4 anti-tank missiles on these. So if they're employed right, they can do some real damage, and they have.
Okay, Mac, that's a fascinating wrinkle there. An MIT graduate. I had no idea. Okay, Florida congressional candidate and retired Navy joining us. Okay, another day, another record.
Now save 25% off and more store-wide.
Plus, that's of you by passing the savings directly onto you.
In Ukraine. And here's what you need to know. Outside experts, the United States government, and independent press fact checks have rejected that claim. So absent further evidence, it looks
of Russia's war on Ukraine, the death toll rises. There are no signs of de-escalation or protection of civilians. In fact, Russia has increased the indiscriminate shelling in many cities. The Russian military convoy long menacing the capital.
What senior U.S. officials are most concerned about. The images coming in tonight, the mayor of Mariupol describing his city as Armageddon, where that maternity and children's hospital was already hit, now shelling every 30 minutes. And the capital of Kyiv tonight, the new images showing that massive Russian convoy closing in. The UN tonight on what it calls credible reports of Russians using cluster bombs, the Russians hitting 2 airfields in western Ukraine, trying to disrupt Western supply shipments from entering the country. Ian Panel in Kyiv again tonight. Also this evening, the new warning from the Biden administration about Russia potentially planning another false flag attack, but this time potentially using biological or chemical weapons. A senior U.S. official telling ABC News the Russians are now bringing those chem biosuits to Ukraine. Martha Raddatz is back in Ukraine tonight with what she's learning from her sources. Tonight, President Biden revealing he is suspending normal trade relations with Russia, what this means. And the president is pressed today. Would the U.S. have a military response if Putin launches a chemical weapons attack? Mary Bruce with the president's response. In Moscow tonight, the Kremlin moving to make it illegal to log onto Facebook or Instagram in Russia. What the Russian people could face if they do it. James Longman from Moscow. Here at home, we're also tracking this major winter storm from the south up into the northeast tonight.
Very far away from Poland. Do you worry that's going to make the humanitarian situation even a lot worse?
Exactly, and while there's plenty of people here to help in Poland, the majority of the humanitarian need is in Ukraine.
Residential neighborhoods with the inevitable civilian casualties has increased. Among the targets, a kindergarten and apartment complex in eastern Ukraine. 2.5 million refugees have fled Ukraine. Tens of thousands of others remain trapped by artillery and missile blasts. We have a lot of news to get to tonight, starting with CBS's Charlie DAKOTA in Kyiv. Charlie, good evening.
Good evening, Major. It's clear tonight that Russian forces are edging closer to the capital. Explosions are becoming louder and more frequent, and new satellite images show units deploying closer to the city. And it comes as Russian troops advance across the country.
Russia widened its punishing military offensive and extended its reach today, unleashing airstrikes and bombarding new cities like Dnipro for the first time since the invasion began, and closed in on areas already in its grip, like some of the suburbs surrounding the capital where residents fled in terror. The snipers have taken over my house, says Valentina, a school teacher. They're shooting in the direction of my son's house, my only son. Preparing for the kind of siege already underway in Ukraine's second largest city of Kharkiv, where Russia, too, has paid a heavy price, evident in the bodies of its soldiers laying face down in the snow. In that horrific airstrike on the maternity hospital in Mariupol and haunting images of a wounded pregnant woman, we have some good news to share. Mariana gave birth today to a baby girl, Veronica. Hospitals are supposed to be given some level of protection in times of war, an obviously civilian target. Yet, the World Health Organization says at least 18 medical facilities have already come under attack. We visited this hospital in the capital today, which, out of necessity, has become an emergency trauma ward for the war wounded. The windows covered with whatever they've got on hand. Dr. Dmytro Myaskinov says after dark, they shut off the lights, too.
When the very large shooting, we ran from this part to this part very quickly.
To get past the windows.
Yes. It was very dangerous.
A shell-shocked woman shares her harrowing story of coming under attack as she and her family tried to flee. Shrapnel tore through her car, her arm, her leg, even her passport. On their worst day here, they treated 70 patients. There is no guarantee the hospital itself will be spared if Russian troops invade. You'd never leave?
No, I stay in my hospital and work to the finish.
To the finish?
Yes.
In addition to investigating attacks on hospitals, the UN said today they've received credible reports of Russian forces using cluster bombs, and the use of such weapons might amount to war crimes. Major?
Charlie DAKOTA, thank you. The situation in southern Ukraine is even more dire as the besieged region is the site of some of the most intense fighting of this war. Russia's defense ministry claimed today that the Black Sea port of Mariupol was now completely surrounded. CBS's Chris Livesay traveled to the southern port city of Mykolaiv.
In the Black Sea port of Mykolaiv, the cold is blinding. It's also this city's salvation. For now, the snow and fog create low visibility. One of the few things keeping the Russians from attacking. Up ahead, the Ukrainian army can't be so sure.
We've just arrived at the airport, which was recently attacked. Just on the other side of this roadblock, several figures are approaching, and we're told they could be Russian soldiers.
The figures retreated, but the threat is advancing nonetheless. In their effort to cut Ukraine off from vital access to the sea, Russian forces are terrorizing Ukraine's shores all along the south coast to here in Mykolaiv. We meet the mayor, Alexander Cmgus, who takes us below a derelict market to a bunker full of women and children.
How important is it that the Russians are stopped here?
Mykolaiv is, let's say, border between Russians and Western civilization.
In this suburb, the air is still thick with soot and ash. Locals say Russian troops have been breaking into homes and looting them. Most residents here fled after the shelling, but Sergei stayed.
Are you afraid that they're going to attack again?
They'll attack us again and again to demoralize us and sow fear, he says, but they won't succeed. Just a few hours later, Sergei's prediction came true. For yet another night. When will it end? Only Vladimir Putin can say. Chris Livesay, CBS News, Mykolaiv, Ukraine.
On the economic front of this conflict, President Biden and our European allies are targeting Russia's ability to trade. The president also announced a U.S. ban on several key Russian products. CBS's Ed O'Keefe has more from the White House.
President Biden unleashed more American economic firepower today with his pledge to end trade relations with Russia, joining the EU and G7 nations.
Doing it in unison with other nations that make up half of the global economy will be another crushing blow to the Russian economy. It's already suffering very badly from our sanctions.
The decision means no more imports of Russian goods like seafood, vodka, and diamonds, costing Vladimir Putin's regime more than $1 billion annually.
Putin is an aggressor. He is the aggressor, and Putin must pay the price.
Today's moves also once again target Russian oligarchs. Now, they can't buy high-end American-made goods like watches, luxury vehicles, clothing, jewelry.
They support Putin. They steal from the Russian people.
And in a new round of sanctions against those oligarchs, the U.S. is cutting off Putin friend Viktor Vekselberg from his $90 million jet and his $90 million yacht, named Tango. Russia is just the 26th largest U.S. trading partner, but today's moves will further sap the Russian economy. The ruble's value has plummeted. The Russian stock market shuttered. And so far, more than 300 companies from across the world have curtailed operations in Russia, including more than 200 American firms. The president discussed the latest economic moves today with Ukrainian leader Zelenskyy, while U.S. diplomats tangled with Russian envoys at the United Nations over Russia's false accusations that Americans are developing biological weapons inside Ukraine.
We're not going to let Russia get away with lying to the world or staining the integrity of the Security Council by using this forum as a venue for legitimizing Putin's violence.
U.S. Ambassador Linda Thomas Greenfield said Russia's lies could be a precursor to justification for their own chemical weapons attacks on Ukraine, prompting this warning from the president.
But Russia would pay a severe price if they use chemicals.
Today, the Pentagon said it could not independently corroborate allegations by Ukraine's defense ministry that Russia is preparing some kind of attack at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant, site of that major disaster back in 1986. Major?
Ed O'Keefe, thank you. Now to the weather. Winter storm.
Chem biosuits to protect against chemical and biological weapons, fearing that false flag event meant to justify Russia's own use of chemical weapons. Today, the U.S. ambassador to the UN slamming Russia for spreading disinformation.
We have serious concerns that Russia may be planning to use chemical or biological agents against the Ukrainian people.
As Russia now expands its attacks for the first time into western Ukraine with those deadly missile strikes. This while its ground forces are closing in on the capital.
The Russians are beginning to make more momentum on the ground towards Kyiv.
A U.S. official saying for Vladimir Putin, everything depends on taking Kyiv. But fierce Ukrainian resistance, these images from the Ukrainian Defense Ministry capturing this ambush of the Russian convoy, is taking a toll. As many as 6,000 Russian soldiers have died, another 15,000 wounded since the war began. And a U.S. official saying as much as 1/5 of the Russian force now inoperable, dead, wounded, or simply bogged down. The U.S. official calling it a fundamental failure in Russia's planning and operations. But Putin trying to adapt, the Kremlin saying 16,000 fighters from the Middle East, including Syria, heading to Ukraine to help them out.
Fascinating reporting on the toll on Russian troops tonight. Martha Raddatz back in Lviv. And Martha, as you know, there have been multiple reports of Vladimir Putin's frustrations with how this is going. Some have suggested he's furious with his FSB, the intelligence teams. Regardless of whether that bears out, one thing is clear. This has not unfolded as Putin thought it would.
It certainly hasn't, David. And despite his ground troops being bogged down, he can still inflict catastrophic damage with artillery fire and missiles, just like he did in Grozny and Syria with indiscriminate bombing. David?
All right, Martha Raddatz. And Martha will be anchoring Sundays this week from Ukraine. Martha will be watching Sunday morning. In the meantime, President Biden tonight cutting off all normal trade relations with Russia. And the president was also pressed, will there be a U.S. response if Russia uses chemical or biological weapons? Let's bring in our senior White House correspondent, Mary Bruce, tonight. And Mary, how did the president respond?
Well, David, the president said that Russia would pay a, quote, severe price, but he wouldn't say what that price would be. I've asked, but the White House tonight says they won't engage in hypotheticals. And while the president would not give a definitive answer as to whether a chemical or biological attack would prompt the U.S. to intervene militarily, Biden again today was emphatic. American forces will not engage directly with the Russians in Ukraine. Biden saying that would be World War III. David.
All right, Mary Bruce, thank you. And one more note on this tonight. Inside Russia, the Kremlin now moving to make it illegal to log on to Facebook or Instagram in Russia, what the Russian people could face. James Longman in Moscow.
Vladimir Putin's assault on free speech intensifying tonight. Facebook's parent company Meta is to be designated an extremist organization. People who log into Facebook or Instagram here could now be tried under the same laws as ISIS terrorists. Moscow says it's in response to Meta's easing of its hate speech guidelines, which allow Ukrainians the ability to call for violence against Russians fighting in their country. The move further limits Russian access to non-state sanctioned information, but young people here will find a way. It's a shame, this young man says, but you can survive without it. The bloggers I'm following will all move to Telegram, and I'll follow them there. Ekaterina Kotrikadze is an anchor of the now closed Liberal Reign TV station, where staff walked out following a media crackdown.
A lot of people, just like me, have lost everything because of one man's decisions. So, yeah, it's horrible.
She's now left the country for her own safety, and she tells me many young men are leaving too, worried that even though Putin has insisted there'll be no draft, they'll be called up to fight.
If you fly from Russia and you enter an airplane, you can see a lot of young men, single. I mean, they're traveling alone, a lot of them, because they're running. Leaving behind their families sometimes.
Meanwhile here, 30 years of progress set back as more and more Western shops close. More than 330 multinational companies have now suspended operations here. Today, Morgan Stanley has now joined household names like Coca-Cola and McDonald's in the exodus. Vladimir Putin shrugging off the financial impact yet again today, saying Russia will adapt.
Vladimir Putin may miss the former USSR, but the difference is millions of Russians now enjoy the kinds of modern comforts that he is now effectively ripping away from them. There are those who do idealize the former Soviet Union, but there are many young people here who never lived through it, and they're desperately scared of what its return might mean. David.
Another week of reporting from James Longman in Moscow. James, thank you. Back here at home tonight into that major winter storm on the move this evening from Texas all the way up into the Northeast, and the threat of dangerous overnight tornadoes now. Senior meteorologist Rob Marciano is timing it all out for us. Hey, Rob.
Hi, David. This looks to be an explosive storm with wild temperature swings, typical of March. Look at all these winter alerts all the way down into the deep south. Out ahead of this thing, we've got the tornado threat. You mentioned that. The low right now is over Mississippi. That tornado threat across North Florida into Georgia and the Carolinas tomorrow. The low rapidly intensifies over D.C. and off the Atlantic. Heavy rain along the I-95 corridor. But look at all that snow behind this thing. A wide swath of snow, anywhere from a coating to a foot well inland, but 30 to 50 mile per hour winds. Everyone will feel those cold winds behind this system.
David, tough weekend ahead. Rob, thank you. And to the alarming images coming in from near Fort Lauderdale, Florida tonight, authorities are investigating a series of spring break overdoses. They say cocaine laced with fentanyl. Multiple people rushed to the hospital, including reports of 5 West Point cadets. Some of the patients in cardiac arrest. Here's Ariel Reshef.
Tonight, that horror unfolding in the middle of spring break near Fort Lauderdale. Authorities say 5 West Point cadets and 2 other victims were taken to the hospital after 4 people overdosed on cocaine laced with fentanyl. 2 more were exposed while performing CPR on their friends. A 7th person transported later in the evening.
Peeked out the window, seen a couple of dudes laid out.
One by one, first responders taking victims out of the rental home and treating them right there on the scene. Investigators say 4 went into cardiac arrest.
It's extremely, extremely potent.
Tonight, authorities concerned about more possible overdoses.
It brings great concern that there could be other ODs over the next couple of days, just basing what we're seeing with the fentanyl that was here.
And David, 2 of those cadets are on the West Point football team. Paramedics using Narcan to revive the victims. West Point says it's investigating. David?
Ariel Reshef tonight. Ariel, thank you. When we come back on a Friday night, the deadly crash into an outdoor restaurant, and then later remembering an icon for generations of children.
Migraine attacks? Qulipta can help prevent migraine attacks. It can't prevent triggers like stress or changes in weather. You can't prevent what's going on outside. That's why Qulipta helps what's going on inside. Qulipta is a pill, gets right to work to prevent migraine attacks and keeps them away over time. Qulipta blocks CGRP, a protein believed to be a cause of migraine attacks. Qulipta is a preventive treatment for episodic migraine. Most common side effects are nausea, constipation, and tiredness. Learn how AbbVie can help you save on Qulipta.
You're going down!
Or new evidence.
Award-winning home security.
Show more of you. Let
researched numerous products and summarized.
At this in the summer, by the way, there's sunbathing and fun on these beaches. Today they're digging and digging, filling sandbag after sandbag to try to protect these beaches. It is the most remarkable effort in the most terrible, chilling weather.
What can you tell us about those efforts and what you're seeing? How many hours a day? How are people getting organized? How are they doing all this? Especially because, as mentioned, many of these people are not trained.
Absolutely. What you can see in Odessa, in the south of Ukraine, it's a big city with a seaport. Most of the city are civilians, but all of those civilians are united to defend Odessa, and they're trying to build fortifications. They're trying to defend the historical buildings. They're trying to learn how to defend themselves. I've lived in this city, and I know how beautiful it is. And I'm sure that after we win this war, a lot of people from all over the world will come to visit it.
What else do you want the rest of the world to understand about what you're facing right now in Ukraine against Russia?
I want the rest of the world to understand that that's a Ukrainian fight for freedom and democracy, and unfortunately, we are being punished for that by Russia. And this war is not only war of Russia with Ukraine. Russia is fighting with the democratic values, and unfortunately, Ukraine became a battleground for this fight. But nevertheless, we are taking this fight, and we are fighting to the end, and we believe that the rest of the world, the democratic world, would support us as much as possible in this fight.
Yeah, appreciate that. I mean, Julia, you said something we've heard from some of your contemporaries, that this is about humanity, freedom, democracy, and that you're fighting to the end. So again, I appreciate you making time for us, Julia Moroshevska, and stay safe, please.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. We fit in a break here, and when we come back, we see Ukrainians who are converting subways into bomb shelters and finding ways to stay safe. Stay with us.
In this market, you'll find Fisher Investments is different than other money managers.
Different. Liberty Mutual customizes your car insurance so you only pay
on upcoming assaults.
Okay, Pablo, I'm going to give you very quickly 10 seconds now. You've got an event coming up to show support. Tell me a little bit about it very quickly, if you could.
We do. We've got an event at 1:30 on Sunday. It's at the corner of Chicago Avenue and Oakley Boulevard. We've got federal officials coming out. Congressman Quigley has already confirmed. We've invited both of our senators and others, and we expect everyone to come out and show the support for closing the skies, creating a humanitarian corridor so women and children can escape from Ukraine and the terror that's going on.
All right. Well, Godspeed to you. Thank you very much, Pablo. Ukrainian Congress Committee of American Vice President Pablo Bonbrisky. Okay, so here's another very literal symbol of how the Ukrainian spirit in the face of this invasion has inspired people here at home in the United States, flying the Ukrainian flag. And who better to tell us what's happening than Kristen Boyle, who makes and sells all kinds of flags, including the colors of Ukraine. We're seeing them all over the place right now. So you're joining me now, the Flag Center president, Kristen Boyle.
Yes.
What are people telling you when they call? Are these Ukrainian Americans, or is it people that previously had absolutely no connection whatsoever to Ukraine?
There's quite a few Ukrainian Americans. Here in Milwaukee, we have a sizable Ukrainian population, so we often will sell, a few flags a year to those churches and people who want to represent their heritage. But since everything has started, we have seen sales increase exponentially. What has changed is the size and scale of flags that we're selling. We sold out of our miniature flags and decals just 4 days after Russia invaded Ukraine. We've sold flags from 12 by 18 inch all the way up to 12 by 18 foot. And our online sales have been coast to coast, from real estate agencies in California to the Belmont racetrack in New York. People really want to show their support for Ukraine at this time.
That's amazing. I mean, can you give me an idea?
Strict LGBTQ laws.
What I would expect the Russians to do is use the fact that her wife is making public statements, and these are being reported in media and social media, as propagandization of LGBTQ plus rights, which then could be another crime that they could hold against her.
The parents of another detained American, former U.S. Marine Trevor Reed, described themselves as panicked over his condition. Following a call with him yesterday, Reed's parents say his physical condition has taken a turn for the worse. It had already been dire.
He's coughing constantly. He said he's coughing up blood throughout the day. He has fever off and on, over 100 degrees, and he has pain in his chest, just all the signs of tuberculosis.
In a new statement, Reed's parents say he was told he'd be sent to a prison hospital. But when they were on the phone with him yesterday, he was summoned to a disciplinary commission and, quote, "We fear authorities might send him back to solitary confinement instead." Reed and fellow former U.S. Marine Paul Whelan were convicted separately for crimes they both emphatically deny and have been detained in Russia since well before the invasion of Ukraine. Whelan's sister gave CNN a fresh clue of his condition.
He is doing as well as can be expected in a forced labor camp in the middle of Russia.
Tonight, experts are openly concerned about the futures of these three Americans, given that the tensions with Vladimir Putin over the conflict in Ukraine are only intensifying.
How difficult will it be to get them out at this point? Is it even possible?
Yeah, we're at such a different level of confrontation with Russia right now. They really are being used as pawns by Russia. He's not going to harm these three, but he's not going to let them out of jail either.
CNN has reached out to the Russian Foreign Ministry for information on Brittany Griner's whereabouts and her condition. We have not heard back. Wolf.
Ryan Todd, thank you very much. More news right after this.
By Geico. Switch
Pontoons, docks, RVs.
Into a quick.
With plenty of resorts and lodges, plan your vacation right at the show. Enjoy great fishing seminars and kids fishing clinics. Take in the Great Lakes Timber Show and the critters at Barnyard Buddies. So come to South Dakota's largest sportsman's show today through Sunday at the Sioux Falls Arena and Convention Center.
A Ford built for you by you. Get yours built from the.
They can also sound condescending on the energy issue by trying to get people to be more energy efficient in their purchases.
The president also at the Philadelphia event, fiery about inflation. Another soundbite here.
We're on track right now. I'm on track to be the first president in history to lower the deficit by over $1 trillion in 1 year. So I'm sick of this stuff. We have to talk about it because the American people think the reason for inflation is government spending more money. Simply not true.
Byron?
You know, I just don't think it's going to work. The whole Putin's price hike thing is not going to work because it conflicts with people's everyday experience. First of all, anybody who's been to the grocery store or tried to buy a car knows that inflation is not just the price of gas. They also remember just last year, you know, inflation had hit about 5% by May of last year. People were very concerned about it. The White House was saying it was transitory. It was a major concern then, and it's even more more so now. A new Wall Street Journal poll just came out today, asked Americans, what issue would you like to see the Congress and the President make a top priority? And the number of people who said the war in Ukraine was 25%. The number of people who said inflation was 50%. So one, it's a very, very big deal. And two, people's experience tells them that what the president is saying doesn't quite add up.
Jeff, we don't know how long this is going to last. Clearly, this is having a devastating effect on the Russian economy. The New York Times writes it this way: facing economic calamity, Putin talks of nationalizing Western businesses. Of particular concern are Western companies that once symbolized post-Soviet Russia's integration into the world economy, like McDonald's, IKEA. Mr. Putin told officials in the televised meeting that the assets of such companies should be put under external management and then transferred to those who want to work. Sounds like big changes may be on the way in Russia.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think it reflects that the effectiveness of the sanctions by the U.S. and by Europe against Russia and the impact that it's having on the economy. The ruble, of course, dropping over 50%. So it's hurting them a lot. But the question of whether the president of Russia and Russia takes over some of these U.S. companies and other companies that are there, or their assets anyway, will raise hackles for sure among these institutions that have spent the last 30 years integrating parts of the economy and investing there. So the White House was asked about this a couple days ago, and Jen Psaki, the spokesperson, said that she didn't have a specific answer for what the White House would do, but she said that they would have a response.
Tough to imagine those companies going back under this current environment. Tough to imagine that. Panel, thanks so much. It is Friday.
Trelegy helps people breathe easier and improves lung function.
Take Zyzol at night.
It's too. Face the Nation. Margaret Brennan's guests include White House National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan. And remember, if you can't watch live, set your DVR so you can watch us later. And that's tonight's CBS Evening News. For Norah O'Donnell, I'm Major Gare of the nation's capital. Have a great weekend.
Seven intense for the chicken.
Continue about the possibility of Russian money being held in South Dakota. We sit down with the man who wrote the Pandora Papers.
A cold, clear evening in our forecast. Here it is, the planner first of all for Sioux Falls. We have a clear sky right now. It's 13 degrees, breezy. The wind's going to drop off as the night goes on. The temperature dropping to 1 below by midnight. In Aberdeen, kind of the same story. Clear down to about 1.
Beautiful new member of our Situation Room family. Her name is Emmeline Grace Filkins, and she's the daughter of our amazing producer, Courtney Pence, and her wonderful husband, John. Emmy was born Monday, weighing in at just over 7 pounds. Mom and baby are healthy. The family couldn't be happier. And we know at this moment in the world how very, very fortunate they feel. Courtney, John, and Emmy, all of us here at CNN wish you nothing but the best. I'm Wolf Blitzer in the Situation Room. I'll be back once again tomorrow for a special Saturday edition of the Situation Room from 5 to 7 p.m. Eastern. Aaron Burnett out front starts with.
Troops close in on Kyiv and other critical cities. The new images, Russian missiles targeting the central city of Dnipro for the first time. Ukrainian officials saying a school and apartment building were destroyed. Ukrainian troops in a fierce firefight near the capital, Kyiv. New satellite images of that massive Russian convoy outside the city, what the U.S. military believes it's now doing. And the pregnant woman injured in the attack on a maternity hospital, the hopeful news we'll share about her. Also tonight, growing fears Russia may use chemical weapons in Ukraine. President Biden warning Russia would pay a severe price as the U.S. bans Russian vodka and more. The late winter storm on the move tonight, 57 million on alert from Texas to Maine. Al Roker timing it out. Gas prices hitting another new record just before spring break. How much more your family may spend this year. As the pandemic officially enters its third year, our report on COVID long haulers spending thousands on expensive treatments. But do they work? And celebrating the Sesame Street star beloved by kids for more than 4 decades.
This is NBC Nightly News with Lester Holt.
Good evening, everyone. Back from assignment in Ukraine, and good to be with you on this Friday evening. The footprint of Russia's war in Ukraine expanding tonight. Targets struck in the west and center of the country for the first time today, and more claims of Russians targeting civilians. But nowhere is the situation more dire than the city of Mariupol. Its population hungry, thirsty, and desperate. Tonight, choked off from relief and escape by encircling Russian forces. Ukraine showing off new videos of what it claims are successes against its larger foe, and the information battle raging tonight and taking a dangerous new turn. The U.S. accusing Russia of cooking up a pretext to use chemical weapons. There's a lot to cover, and we start with Richard Engel inside the capital, Kyiv.
Russian forces are expanding their assault on Ukraine, striking the central city of Dnipro for the first time. Nothing seems to be off limits. Ukrainian officials say this was a home for the elderly and disabled, hit by a Russian bomb in Kharkiv. All of the residents were in a shelter and survived. Further south in the besieged city of Mariupol, Russian forces have cut the city off. No food or water. Local officials describing it as Armageddon and say 1,500 people have died because of the blockade.
No way out, any way out. Russian troops do not allow even for humanitarian help.
Though one sliver of good news, the pregnant woman seen in the aftermath of that strike on the city's maternity hospital, she gave birth to a baby girl and named her Veronica. Tonight, there are signs Russia's momentum is slowing. At a meeting with his defense council, Russian President Vladimir Putin gave the green light for mercenaries from the Middle East, mostly from allied Syria, to bolster Russian ranks, which have been taking heavy losses. The Ukrainian military put out this drone video, it says, of a Russian tank column outside of Kyiv, lured into an ambush. But Russia still has 90% of its forces intact. Though a senior U.S. military official says that 40-mile Russian convoy is stalled 9 miles outside the capital. The vehicles now hiding under trees to protect them from Ukrainian attack. In Kyiv tonight, volunteers are preparing to defend the capital in a basement gun range. Miro Popovich, who we met last week, is Ukrainian-born, served in the U.S. military in Afghanistan, and became an American citizen.
When Russians are pushing the city, the military, the official military, they take the first hit, and then groups like ours, we are here to help them, whatever they need.
So is it going to be like a guerrilla war, like hit and run tactics?
Yes, exactly.
Popping out of...
Absolutely right. I'm pretty sure, even if I'm saying it right now, Russian military, they are not prepared for us, for militarized civilian resistance.
And you guys are just going to pop out and shoot them?
From every single hole. And bam, 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 bam. We're going to give them like hell.
Richard, you're seeing their defenses ramp up there. Now Kyiv's mayor says the city has enough food and supplies for 2 more weeks?
About 2 more weeks, he said, and the supply route is still open to part of the city, so food and weapons can still come in here. This is a heavily fortified city, and there's still about 2 million people here. And it seems that if Vladimir Putin wants to take this city, he's probably going to have to blow it up. But he might be willing to do that. Lester.
A sad but frank assessment. Richard, thank you. And as the conflict rages, the U.S. is in a high-stakes information war with Russia, fighting false claims, warning against the use of chemical weapons, and turning up the economic heat even more. Peter Alexander is at the White House with more on all that.
President Biden tonight delivering this blunt warning to Vladimir Putin.
Russia would pay a severe price if they use chemicals.
At a heated UN Security Council meeting, Russia accused the U.S. and Ukraine of preparing to use chemical and biological weapons. What the U.S. is blasting as lies, a false Russian pretext to justify a potential chemical attack.
I will say this once. Ukraine does not have a biological weapons program.
It comes as the president is trying to further squeeze the Russian economy, saying the U.S. would join allies in ending normal trade relations with Moscow. That, once approved by Congress, would allow the U.S. to raise tariffs on Russian products.
Putin is an aggressor. He is the aggressor, and Putin must pay the price.
President Biden's new sanctions also banned several Russian imports, including caviar, vodka, and diamonds. Though Putin today, hosting Belarus's president, brushed off the escalating sanctions, saying the Soviet Union constantly lived with them. But more than 40 Senate Republicans argue President Biden is not going far enough, demanding he assist in the transfer of Poland's fighter jets that Ukraine's president desperately wants.
We've gone from incompetent by the Biden administration to this move is dishonorable.
The Pentagon and White House have ruled that out.
The idea that we're going to send in offensive equipment and have planes and tanks and trains, that's called World War III.
Next week, President Biden will sign a $1.5 trillion bipartisan spending bill with nearly $14 billion in emergency aid for Ukraine to help refugees and to restock the country with more badly needed military equipment. Lester?
All right, Peter Alexander at the White House, thank you. And in Ukraine this past week, I saw for myself the desperation, the heartbreak on the faces of so many, especially the children. Tonight, Molly Hunter takes us inside a hospital in Lviv that some of the sickest children have finally reached.
We meet 7-year-old Sophia 4 days after she was ripped away from her home near Kyiv. And her nurse, Dubravina, has been by her side for the last 2 years. With her lollipop, she's receiving dialysis, awaiting a kidney transplant. It took Dubravina 24 hours to bring Sophia and 14 other very sick children by train from Kyiv to Lviv. And that's Bunny Kuzo, who also traveled from Kyiv. The Western Ukrainian Specialized Children's Medical Center is overrun. It is the triage hub for the country. Dr. Olena Kozlova runs their pediatric oncology ward. Learning your child has cancer is the worst day of a mother's life, Dr. Kozlova explains.
But at this situation, when they must leave her town.
But having a child with cancer amid a cruel war is a hell no one should have to endure. Single mom Ina's 8-year-old son Danny Lou was diagnosed with blood cancer on February 5th. Then the war started. 3 days ago, they fled the besieged city of Kharkiv in an ambulance.
Bombs. Everything. It was full-scale war. Everything was bombed. We were living in the basement all the time.
What does it feel like as a mother just to have all of this out of your control?
I have to be strong, she says. I'll do whatever it takes to get him the treatment he needs. But the logistics are complicated. Dr. Kozlova and her team staying in Lviv are partnering with St. Jude Children's Hospital to get children safely out of the country.
For our Ukraine, we cannot go to abroad. We must stay here.
For Ukraine and for brave little children like Sophia, who won't stop fighting either.
Now, there is some good news. Ina, that mother from Kharkiv, her 8-year-old son, Danny Lou, is stable enough to travel, so they are scheduled to get out to Poland tomorrow on an evacuation convoy. Lester?
Molly, thanks. So many innocents caught up in all this. More than 2.5 million people have fled Ukraine since the Russian invasion began, and now some of them are arriving at the U.S. southern border. Guad Venegas is in Mexico to tell us more about that.
They carry Ukrainian passports, but no visas to enter the U.S.
I don't have any other place to go.
Sophia and her 3 children left 3 days after the bombings began, driving across Romania before flying here to the U.S.-Mexico border.
I have family and friends in USA, and they're ready to support me.
Sophia was denied entry twice, and she's not alone.
This group, including 9 Ukrainians, was turned away yesterday and again today by Border Patrol officers. Now, like many others, they're confused and have no idea what they'll be doing next.
We're going to welcome Ukrainian refugees with open arms.
Despite the president's remarks today, the U.S. border is still officially closed to asylum seekers due to a 2020 COVID policy.
Right now, there's nothing we can do, sir.
Any exemptions are made on a case-by-case basis.
Oh, we've been trying to ask those guys on the border control, to help us with that case.
Alex's family fled after their home was shelled. Today, they were turned away.
Right now, we have a trickle that's turning into a stream that's going to turn into a flood.
On her 3rd attempt, a lawyer spotted Sophia and helped her enter the U.S., where her case would be reviewed. Others hoping they'll be next as the war back home rages on and more families join the line. Guad Venegas, NBC News, Tijuana, Mexico.
Here at home, a weekend of severe and dangerous weather for tens of millions of people in the eastern third of the country. Al Roker is following it all. Al, what are we in for?
Lester, here in Austin, yesterday 76, today 32 degrees with wind chills and wind gusts of over 30 miles per hour. Just part of this system that stretches all the way to the northeast. Right now, 130 million people are under some sort of winter weather advisory, warning, watch, or flood watch. We've also got severe weather down to the south, 17 million people with the risk of nighttime deadly tornadoes. The rain and snow already hitting the southeast, the snow up to the north. When all is said and done, we are talking about some places, interior New York and New England, upwards of a foot or more, and heavy rain all the way down from the mid-Atlantic into the southeast with the potential of flooding in the panhandle of Florida. A rough next 24 hours. Lester?
Al Roker, thank you. Also tonight, gas prices hitting another record high, $4.33 a gallon. The soaring prices coming just as American families are planning spring break getaways. As Tom Costello explains, it may be just a taste of what's to come this summer.
For families leaving for spring break, prepare for the squeeze. Post-pandemic, the crowds are back, pushing prices higher, just as the Russian invasion has sent gas prices to record levels. A year ago, a 500-mile road trip would cost about $70 in gas. This year, it's averaging about $108, and much more in California.
Can you get me a loan?
It was over $50.
Rental cars averaging $80 more each day than last year. Hotels up 30% in a year. Meanwhile, domestic airfares are back to where they were before the pandemic, $300 on average. But with the cost of jet fuel also surging, summer airline tickets could get more expensive. So book now. Flying on June 1st, New York to Phoenix is averaging $270 now, Kansas City to Las Vegas $244. But European travel bookings have dropped as the war in Ukraine rages.
They are still interested in traveling. That demand hasn't disappeared. It's simply shifted back towards a bit closer in destinations.
Flying to London is now averaging $558 for June 1st. Madrid, $713. Paris, $828. Wherever you go, expect to pay more for entertainment and eating out.
I think a lot of people may opt for more of a staycation or more of a regional trip.
If you haven't booked your summer vacation yet, experts recommend comparison shopping now. Second choice destinations and hotels may help save the family some money. Lester?
Okay, Tom, thank you. In just 60 seconds, our series, The New Normal, 2 years into the pandemic, what we know and the search for answers.
Making friends again, Billy?
I like to keep my enemies close.
Guys, excuse me. I didn't quite get that. I'm hard of hearing.
Rebound by
The world's largest logistics companies, U.S.-based shipping giants FedEx and UPS, have halted delivery service. Tech companies, too, are cutting ties. Spotify closed its office in Russia indefinitely. Apple and Microsoft ceased all sales, including game consoles and cell phones, a move already felt by shoppers in Moscow.
I am so used to having my Apple laptop, phone, earbuds, and watch. I enjoy that my gadgets can give me advice and tell me how I feel. If I lose it all, I will be very disappointed.
Options for entertainment, too, are waning. Netflix has suspended its streaming service in Russia. Warner Brothers, Sony Pictures, and Disney have all paused movie releases.
I know, it's a lot.
And as part of a larger move to isolate Russia financially, Visa, American Express, and MasterCard have all halted operations.
For a closer look on all of this, I'm joined by Jeffrey Sonnenfeld of the Yale School of Management. He keeps a public list of these companies and has been speaking with some of the companies about the decision to withdraw from Russia. Jeffrey Sonnenfeld, welcome to the NewsHour. Thanks for making the time. So that list keeps growing, right, of companies breaking operations, suspending operations. You and your team are keeping track, over 300 so far, I believe. But tell me, how big of an impact is all of this having, or could all this have, on the ground in Russia?
Hi, Amna. Thank you very much. Yes, it's having an enormous impact already. Is that these voluntary business blockades matched with governmental sanctions on certain key industries, finance and transportation, have worked to help slow up this economy, if not bring it to a complete standstill. Already, we're seeing inflation approaching 30%. We're seeing the Russian ruble has plunged in value 80% or so. It's unheard of. We saw this happen with South Africa, where we had this great cooperation between business and government. Although then, like now, there were no government officials encouraging this or asking for it or pleading for it. There are no mandates. It's voluntary. But Bishop Desmond Tutu, the great civil rights leader in South Africa, had told me back at that time in the late 1980s, when business leaders did it then, how important it was that we bring this economy to a standstill, to freeze civil society, the way Gandhi did in India, the way the protesters did in Romania to bring down Nicolae Ceausescu or Erich Honecker in East Germany. It shows that a tyrant is not an effective totalitarian across all sectors. And that way, rather than through bloody warfare to take down a despot, you can hopefully do it this way.
What about this new threat of nationalization from the Russian regime? How does this change the landscape or change the calculus for companies?
Well, it's got companies really confused because they don't know if those who stayed are somehow going to be immune from these threats, or if Putin's going to just try to expropriate all Western companies. But it's going to paralyze Russia even further, because you have places like, I don't know, McDonald's or IBM's who've shuttered their operations, but were still paying their workforces and still wanted to maintain good relations with the Russian citizenry. And that's what had the consumer products firms reluctant to move at all. They thought in this, many of them were symbols of liberation and freedom, like Levi's and Starbucks, McDonald's, PepsiCo, and Coke, that people in Russia in 1990 onward thought, well, these were a link to from the East and the West and pulling us together in a world of harmony. That world sadly is gone, but we don't know what the ripple effect's going to be of these expropriation threats, but it will probably make them even just more of a pariah. Even China, despite equivocating public statements, has refused to send credit in to any of these establishments in Russia.
You know, we have seen companies take a stand like this before. You've been involved in these when it comes to voting rights or to gun control, but the scope of the companies involved, the mix of the companies, as you mentioned, is really something different here. Why was it so different this time around? What made the difference?
The scope and speed is remarkable. You can see in all the national surveys that 75–80% of the American public want these companies to do this and want us all to do more, that there's no gray area. A lot of times business leaders are not just problem solvers, but they're always looking for that third solution, that a middle ground, that there's somehow, we have issues that are black and white, we're going to wrestle with the gray. There's no middle ground here. You have a vicious villain and you have these innocent victims. And that sort of upsets the mindset of a lot of business leaders to get there, but they're getting there quickly.
There are some who argue that this is beyond the scope of corporate duty, right? That this is beyond just a business primary interest. So when you're telling anyone who's reluctant or hesitant why they should join this list, what do you say?
I say that this is a critical issue. It's a top priority. Sure, there's a whole host of humanitarian and social justice and human rights issues that cover the world, and can we address them all? That slippery slope argument is the cowardly excuse for inaction used in any action, any moral crusade. Bombing children's hospitals is an exception. Mowing down refugees fleeing, supposedly in the midst of a ceasefire, being machine gunned down, innocent civilians, unarmed. That's different than all these other causes. And then is this part of the strategic context of business? Yes, it is. Every bit as much as the technology sphere, the marketing sphere, and the financial sphere, the geopolitical sphere is part of the strategic context of business. When I hear some critics, ideological critics, telling CEOs to stay in their lane, you wonder, what lane are they talking about? The breakdown lane? Of course, this is part of what a CEO has to focus on. In the 1840s, Tocqueville visited this country, the great political scientist. He said, what makes this country different isn't just the legal system, it's the foundation of public trust, which he called social capital. As he coined that term way back then, as important as financial capital. And that's what we have here, the fortification of social capital. We have to believe our systems work. It's safe and fair for the free markets to work. So, of course, it's in the interest of business, their corporate reputations, and of course, the trust in our systems.
That is Jeffrey Sonnenfeld of the Yale School of Management joining us tonight. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
For more now on how the situation in Ukraine is being seen in Russia and the price exacted by Western sanctions and other economic moves, we turn again to special correspondent Ryan Chilcote, who is in Moscow. So Ryan, hello. We are hearing that Vladimir Putin looking at sending more troops into Ukraine. What do you know about that?
So the context of that is that the Russian president was having a video conference with several officials, including Russia's defense minister, Sergei Shoigu. Sergei Shoigu told Vladimir Putin that about 16,000 volunteers from the Middle East would like to go to Ukraine, and said that it would be a good idea for Russia to allow them to do that. Vladimir Putin responded by saying, look, we have all of these mercenaries from around the world pouring into Ukraine to fight on the other side with the support of, as he put it, the Kiev regime's Western sponsors, and that they're doing that openly. So we should effectively facilitate these volunteers' desire to go to Ukraine. Now, presumably we're talking about volunteers from Syria. That wasn't included in his comments, but remember that Russia helped the regime in Syria in 2015. Now, analysts will tell you two things. Vladimir Putin here clearly keeping to this principle that he has of an eye for an eye. So if the West is doing this, then we're going to do it as well. Send in these volunteers, as he put it, especially because, as he put it, they won't be paid. Although you could argue, or some would argue, that this is really reciprocal. And the second thing I think analysts would say when they hear, they heard that from the Russian president, is that this is Vladimir Putin indicating to everyone that he has no intention of backing down in Ukraine. Judy?
And Ryan, it is also the case that Putin seemed to be saying that there's been some positive movement in negotiations with Ukraine. What is he supposedly referring to?
Yeah, you know, that's not entirely clear. We heard from Ukraine's top diplomat earlier in the day saying that there had been zero progress. Look, Russia has three stated demands in Ukraine, and they are that Ukraine demilitarize, that Ukraine recognize the territory that Russia either recognizes or controls. The final pledge or demand that the Russians are making, I should say, is that Ukraine agree to be a neutral state. Well, Ukraine has indicated that they would look at some kind of pledge where they would say that they would not join NATO. But again, they are not prepared to cede any territory at this point. Judy?
And then, Ryan, the other development here in the United States, President Biden announcing new sanctions on Russian diamonds, Russian vodka, and seafood. He also announced that the G7 countries are going to be revoking Russia's most favored nation trading status. How is all that being received in Moscow?
Well, look, the Russian view is that U.S. trade is much smaller than European trade. So I think, you know, if the G7 follows suit, then that would be a much bigger issue. And we have heard that the EU is prepared to move tomorrow when it comes to the most preferred trading state. You know, EU-Russian trade, the Russians said about a third of their exports to the EU, as opposed to 5% to the United States. So that's something clearly we're going to have to watch. Judy?
A lot of moving parts. Ryan Chilcote joining us on a very cold night in Moscow. Thank you, Ryan. In the day's other news, the world marked 2 years since COVID-19 was officially declared a pandemic. Since then, there have been more than 6 million deaths worldwide, including 965,000 in the U.S. But a new study in the medical journal The Lancet estimates the real figure may be closer to 18 million deaths across the globe. That's 3 times the official count. Lately, the number of new cases and deaths has fallen in most countries, but Germany's infection rate has risen for 9 straight days, prompting a new warning today.
Objectively, the situation is much worse than the mood. The mood among the population, including in parts of the political landscape, is such that we have already overcome the pandemic. This is simply based on a misjudgment.
German officials say some of the increase comes from a more contagious version of the Omicron variant known as BA2. The Texas Supreme Court today rejected a challenge to the nation's toughest abortion law. It bans the procedure after 6 weeks of pregnancy and lets private citizens sue those assisting in an abortion. The court said that state officials don't enforce the law, so they can't be sued by abortion providers. Opponents of the law already lost at the U.S. Supreme Court. Arrests of migrants inside the U.S. have fallen sharply in the past year. U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement reported today there were 74,000 arrests in 2021. That reflected the Biden administration's focus mainly on migrants who commit serious crimes. Deportations reached a historic low at 59,000. That's down 70% from the previous year. Tensions rose today between India and Pakistan after New Delhi confirmed that it accidentally fired a missile into Pakistan. Indian officials blamed a technical malfunction. Pakistan's military said no one was hurt, but officials complained that the unarmed missile crossed commercial airspace between Sirsa in India and eastern Pakistan.
The incident could have resulted in a major aviation disaster as well as civilian casualties on ground. Pakistan strongly protests this flagrant violation and cautions against recurrence of any such incident.
The two nuclear-armed nations have fought 4 conventional wars since 1947. Negotiators trying to restore the 2015 Iran nuclear deal have stepped back, despite signs they're close to an agreement. The European Union called a pause today with no timetable for resuming. It followed Russian demands that sanctions imposed as a response to the war in Ukraine not affect its trade with Iran. The U.S. said that Tehran and Moscow need to make some key decisions. In Chile, the leftist Gabriel Boric took office as president today, pledging to attack poverty and inequality. He was sworn in before the Chilean Congress as the nation's youngest leader ever, just 36 years old. Earlier, he reflected on the job ahead.
I'm very excited at this time, with a great sense of responsibility of the duty that we have before the Chilean people. Know that we are going to do our best, the best of us, to rise to the challenges we face as a country.
Boric's election came in the wake of mass protests over economic conditions. China set a goal today of creating...
He's back into old hobbies, but it looks like he's picked up new...
The best products ever.
And as I pass it on to my daughter, it's an important part of understanding who we are.
A statement suggesting that a cafe, a car, workshop have been hit during this intense bombardment that he called indiscriminate. And what's difficult to tell about this particular episode is whether or not it relates to a Russian military move against the city. There's been a suggestion in the same post by the regional head that there is some sort of active hostilities in the northern part of the city. That is exactly where we've seen Russian troops try to move around the city down towards its western side, the fear being that they're essentially moving to try and encircle it, to recreate what we're seeing in Mariupol far to the east of Mykolaiv on the Sea of Azov, which is essentially the besieging of that particular city, and it's grinding down to ruins. Mykolaiv, though, a place where the civilian toll has been startling so far, as has the Russian inability to move into the city centre. And so the latest post from the regional head talks about a boring night and how he's going to get some rest. That may just be trying to keep people's morale up, but certainly what's been true over the past days, Aaron, is that we've not seen the Russian military successfully gain control over that city or move past it on their way to here, what most think of the strategic goal of the main port of Odessa. Aaron?
Yeah. Yes, it is amazing, of course, the incredible fortitude that we continue to see. Nick, thank you so very much. It's live in Odessa tonight. And more breaking news, the U.S. Energy Secretary Jennifer Granholm has just tweeted, and I want to read it to you. It says, "We remain concerned by the lack of data from safeguards monitors at Chernobyl or Zaporizhia, which hinders the world's ability to track materials from those sites." Those obviously are two nuclear sites. Zaporizhia is the largest nuclear power plant in Europe. Chernobyl is a massive pile of nuclear waste. This is Ukraine warns Russia may be planning a terror attack at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant, which Russia has now seized control of. That plant is currently without power. It's off the grid. Ukraine also says it lost all communication with the plant. Now, it has 20,000 nuclear fuel rods there. They have to be cooled. So when it's off the grid, that is something to be pretty concerned about. They currently are on diesel backups. They last 48 hours. Right at the end of that window today, they got a diesel fuel delivery, we understand, for the backup generators. That was within hours of running out. But as I said, 20,000 spent nuclear fuel assemblies that'll overheat if they don't get cooled, running off of a generator. That's not intended to be, nor can it be, a permanent solution. Every 48 hours it needs to be refilled. The head of the company that oversees Ukraine's nuclear plants urging the world to act now before it is too late. Here's what he shared with us.
The ongoing Russian shelling makes it impossible to carry out repairs and restore power supply. We are calling on the global community to apply all their efforts to prevent a new worldwide catastrophe.
To prevent a worldwide catastrophe, out front now is Edwin Lyman. He is the Director of Nuclear Power Safety at the Union of Concerned Scientists. And Edwin, I really appreciate your time. So, Chernobyl is without power, right? There's a massive 20,000 rods that need to be cooled, right, that are nuclear waste. Needed repairs are not being made. Ukraine says it's lost all communication with it. The regulator says that the staff and the guards, who you just heard talk there, he also told me that they've been living there for more than 2 weeks, limited amounts of food. Same shift, right, that's been there for 2 weeks, not allowed to go anywhere. He says the psychological pressure on them is incredibly severe and bad. How serious is all of this?
Well, these are all troubling factors because any nuclear facility needs to have multiple levels of safety in case something does go wrong. So the fact that there's no off-site power right now, the fact that these staff are undoubtedly fatigued, under stress, and the fact that there are these 20,000 spent fuel rods that do require cooling from electrically powered pumps are all troubling. However, the good news is that even if power is lost to that facility, there would be time, probably many weeks, to intervene before there was significant damage to the fuel in the pool.
So, okay, so I guess we'll take the positive of that. I know, obviously, he's saying, look, there's 7 days from the power, but I hope that it would be weeks. But all of this, of course, is very concerning with the staff. He also said something about the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant that I wanted to ask you about. Edwin, that obviously is the largest plant in all of Europe. Russia attacked that plant, has control of it. The first of the plant's 6 units, which is home to a nuclear reactor, was damaged by the shelling. Again, this is from the man you just saw who oversees all of these. He says there was significant damage to the elevated walkway by Unit 2. The transformer at Unit 6 taken out of service. The cooling system there, he said, was damaged. And a fire destroyed the plant's training building. Here is what Mr. Koden had to say about that.
At the moment, there are 50 units of heavy equipment, about 400 Russian soldiers, and a lot of explosives and weapons on site. Also, the Ukrainian staff work at the plant in all 6 power units. The management is forced by occupiers to coordinate all technical issues. The staff is under heavy psychological pressure from the occupiers, but our people are resisting. An accident can happen at any moment.
How worried are you about Zaporizhzhia?
Yes, well, Zaporizhzhia, because it has operating nuclear power plants as well as spent nuclear fuel, which is hotter than the fuel at Chernobyl, poses a greater concern. And although the situation seems relatively stable right now, it is a cause for concern because if there is a mistake or if something goes wrong, that staff under pressure may not be able to function well enough to prevent a disaster. So no nuclear power plant should be the target of a war. The staff should be allowed to do what they need to do without undue pressure. There need to be supplies. There need to be the infrastructure of the plant needs to be maintained. And because we're not sure about many of those factors, I think there is cause for concern. Again, there would be time to intervene if something did happen, but probably less time, a lot less time than at Chernobyl. So there needs to be an agreement that these plants be off the target list and outside of any kind of military campaigns.
Right, and obviously not at all what we...
What was funny?
First, second, and third.
Home plate of...
Tickets start at $15. Get yours today at PBR.com or Ticketmaster.com and find out what it means to be cowboy.
Your Duffy and Ross in the lineup.
To identify them and then take them out. And that is because what you're seeing is a military that has not performed up to standard, has not performed up to expectations, and you are seeing generals now whose careers certainly are on the line, and they're out there now trying to troop lead from the front. And while that sounds like a good thing to do, it's not necessarily the best thing that they can do, simply because when you lose a commander, it throws the unit into turmoil, and then takes a period for them to settle that down and get back in the fight. So I think it's a great thing that they've taken these generals out. Being a former general, I can tell you that they're in the wrong place at the wrong time.
Yeah, that video you're just seeing is actually from Mariupol. You talked about the Javelin missiles. That's the Javelin taking out one of the Ukrainian tanks. Back here to the big map, as well as the Ukrainians have done in the north, they've also done pretty well with this defense holding off the Russians at Odessa, which is their last port city that they hold there. You've got the Russians making pretty good moves north here. They've hit here, one of the big industrial towns on the Dnieper River. It looks like they're trying to cut off this large Ukrainian force that's been pinned down in the east that they almost certainly will then just crush and slaughter. How long till this goes from being a force-on-force war to an insurgency war, and how does that change things?
Well, I think the key is Kiev. Once they take Kiev, then I think that that is when they really are going to see the insurgency come out full blown. You know, the Ukrainians have had plenty of time now to prepare for this. They're outgunned, they're outnumbered. In every category, they're the underdogs, but in one category, and that is their purpose. They have a purpose for fighting.
Yeah.
And it is all about the future of their nation, the future of their families, and they are fighting with such tenacity that I don't think we could speculate precisely how long they're going to hold out before they go into an all-out insurgency. But make no mistake, they will fight to the last, and they will have a very tough insurgency that's going to take out a lot of Russians, and that has already gotten the attention of moms back home.
Yeah, you make an excellent point in terms of having the moral high ground in war. Von Clausewitz, I know, made that point. We think about where the Russians are going to have to focus. Mariupol, we've seen them shelling a significant amount, but in the cities that they're going to end up fighting, Kharkiv, obviously in Kyiv, they're going to have to fight. And certainly if they want to go into the west, they're going to fight in the cities, something the Russians are not trained in, something that foreign fighters, especially from the Middle East, are. Here's Vladimir Putin just earlier today talking about bringing in foreign fighters. Take a listen.
Если вы видите, что есть люди, которые хотят на добровольной основе, тем более не за деньги, приехать и оказать помощь людям, проживающим на Донбассе, ну что же, надо пойти им навстречу и помочь им перебраться в зону боевых действий.
And he says there's 16 or 17,000 Syrians and other foreigners who are ready to come fight. Who knows whether to believe that or not, but you think about Kharkiv, General, where the Russians have had to go around it because of how fierce the fighting is. They're heading off towards Kyiv there, but the city of Kharkiv they've held out in. Would the foreign fighters make a difference if this turns into an insurgency war?
Well, first of all, ask yourself why Vladimir Putin needs them. Why is he willing to even consider letting people from the Middle East or some other part of the world come in and fight for him? And it is because I think his military has been an embarrassment to him. I think that he thought that this was an opportunity to showcase his first-rate military, and they have done anything but that. I think it's an embarrassment. So ask yourself, Why does he need them? Why would he let them come in? Second thing is obviously more guns, more boots on the ground. Certainly that could be a help to him. And but I tell you what, I think that from my perspective, Leland, in almost every category, he's already lost this war. Now, he may take the nation, he may take Ukraine, but he's lost this war in so many categories now. He's unified Europe, he's unified NATO, he's ruined his own reputation worldwide. I think even the Chinese are relooking whether they really want the kind of alliance that they've had with him. Yeah. So I think that he's lost in every category except ultimately he may take the country.
Yeah, when the emperor has no clothes, it's a lot easier not to be behind him. And the Chinese point is an excellent one. So much, General, of whether or not the Ukrainians are going to be able to hold out depends on the supply lines. This is obviously Poland. The airport, the NATO airport that everything's being flown into is up here just about 100 miles from Lviv. There's a road that leads down here from Lviv. And then the supply lines of the resupply of Javelin missiles, Stinger missiles, and the like come out to all the Ukrainian forces from there. Over the past 24 hours, the Russians have started a lot of air attacks here in some of the industrial cities out in the west. They're rehitting Lviv, the like. There's been some hits here and here, conceivably on those supply lines. How secure and for how long can these supply lines and the ability to get the Ukrainians these weapons last?
Well, first of all, the Russians realize how critical that is to the Ukrainians. So you can bet that it's only a matter of time, and it's not going to be that long before they're going to do everything they can to shut off that supply line. That is almost a single point of failure with regards to the support to the Ukrainians right now. So they're going to go after that. They're going to try to shut it down. But look, right now, we just need to keep pumping as much, as quickly as we can through that pipeline while it's still open.
You make a great point in terms of how the Russians view that, although their forces are still a long way away, getting a little closer to being able to close it off around Kyiv. General Boykin, it's always good to see you, sir, and a pleasure when you can join us. Thank you.
Good to be with you, Leland.
Good to be with you. Coming up, something you will love to see, college kids having fun on the beach. As they say, the pandemic is over. One bar owner with what partying like 2019 really means.
Crisis in the Ukraine, we have a tier 2.
Keep programs like ours on the air.
Tractor Supply has been a neighbor to those raising cattle.
And praying for the people of the Ukraine. We need your help. We need your
people, vulnerable people, older people don't have their medicine, don't have access to the food and the humanitarian aid. I just hope people hear you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And next, an incredible story of commitment. Children from Ukraine, despite fleeing a war, some are still finding a way to continue going to school. This is a stunning story. Plus, the war in Ukraine, obviously affecting gas prices around the world. Here is what one truck driver is experiencing.
It's an extra $800 a month. I mean, I don't care who you are, that's going to hurt you.
Small business owners know they've got to be prepared for anything. And when you use Constant Contact, prepare accordingly. Let's send this.
And now is starting to spike. The culprit is one of the most lethal animals on the planet, a mosquito called Aedes aegypti. Aside from dengue, it is a vector for Zika, chikungunya, and yellow fever.
So as long as we have these mosquitoes in enough numbers for these transmission to occur, that's when we're going to continue seeing these outbreaks.
Andrea Leal is executive director of the Florida Keys Mosquito Control District.
We're talking about a mosquito species that here in the Keys represents about 4% of our mosquito collection, so a very small percent of our population. And it's responsible for 100% of our mosquito-borne diseases.
A fleet of helicopters routinely spreads a bacteria called BTI, which kills mosquito larvae, as well as liquid pesticides that target adults. And on the ground, 35 foot soldiers march door to door on patrol for standing water, where the mosquitoes hatch. This ceramics dealer in Key Largo is a frequent stop for Mosquito Control Field Inspector Ryan Rodriguez.
Well, this is prime area for them. You got water, you got shade, and it's so damp and humid right now that this is like their good stuff. This is where they like to be.
He adds BTI larvicide to standing water.
I just drop one in there.
That is home to Aedes aegypti larvae.
Standing water is potentially a breeding spot for Aegypti. So no matter what it is, it can be in a bottle cap even. You just look in there.
They estimate they have reduced the Aedes aegypti population by 50%.
Don't see any larvae in there.
But that is not nearly enough.
If we can introduce another tool that, is cost effective and works very well, then that's something that we're really hoping that this trial will show.
The trial. After a decade of tribulation, it is finally underway here.
This is our release box. This is where we have our eggs and some of the food.
Entomologist Rajiv Vaidyanathan is director of U.S. programs for Oxitec, a company that produces genetically modified male mosquitoes with a gene lethal to females, which do all the biting.
The male mosquitoes mate with the female mosquitoes, and when those females lay eggs, all of their males will live and their female progeny will die.
Oxitec mosquitoes first flew in the field in Brazil and the Cayman Islands in 2010. Biochemist Nathan Rose heads regulatory affairs at Oxitec.
We've seen in Brazil a 90% reduction in disease in the areas where we released our mosquitoes, against approximately a 50% reduction in other parts of the city where other control measures were potentially being used.
Researchers the world over are watching the high-stakes Oxitec field trials very closely.
What are we looking at in the bucket today?
Kate Hill is a professor of entomology at Purdue University. Climate change, population growth, and travel patterns have put about half of the world's population in harm's way of mosquito-borne diseases.
Human feeds back. Will we find Fauci? Will the Durham investigation reveal that the Clinton campaign did in fact commit crimes against President Donald Trump?
Including loans for small businesses and low and moderate income areas.
Tonight, the number of refugees leaving Ukraine due to Russia's invasion now topping 2.5 million. Many of these, of course, as we have all seen, we saw there and you see on your screens every single night, are children whose lives will never be the same. For some, though, what they're thinking about is missing their friends, seeing their fellow classmates again online. Who knows if they'll ever see them again in person, to make sure that they're okay, that they're alive, to find out where in the world they are right now. Ivan Watson is out front in Chisinau, Moldova.
An all too familiar scene for parents who lived through the COVID pandemic.
Окей, зрозуміло. Ну, ще трішки
Children
залишилось.
fidgeting through a Zoom class about the solar system.
Привіт, Тимур.
The difference here, most of these Ukrainian school kids are refugees, reconnecting with their classmates and teacher online. In the last 2 weeks, the students and their teacher fled to different countries to escape Russia's invasion of Ukraine. How old are your students?
7, 8.
From Poland, Nadia Pavlenka teaches her students online classes, even though the school stopped paying her salary.
И непонятно, что будет.
None of us know what will happen next, she says, but these classes with my children are like a bridge to my past life in Ukraine. They help us feel connected. Wartime distance learning. There's a lot of this going on right now.
Do you think the online classes are helping these kids?
Very much. It's helping them and mental health to feel the routine, that the life is still going on. That it's not the end of the world.
Alexander Parkalab is a school teacher who fled the Ukrainian city of Odessa to neighboring Moldova. In the morning, he teaches students from his Ukrainian school online.
Children ask me if I'm safe, where I am, with who I am. They were asking me before me asking them.
In the afternoon, he comes here, a makeshift school for Ukrainian children in the Moldovan capital.
Parents asked me to make a place to feel very safety and maybe just emotionally for 2-3 hours or more, just feel, to escape all this.
Half of his online students fled across borders. The other half are still in Ukraine.
The first lesson in Zoom, I said that you should be this first domino to help somebody. Maybe your mother need help, maybe mother's friends need help, and this is what can I do? I cannot change the world, but I can change me and change like the mood of my mother, and it will be like a domino.
These girls say they're looking forward to starting online classes with their Ukrainian classmates on Monday.
Lena says she wants to find out where her classmates traveled to and to make sure that they're healthy right now.
8-year-old Timur Zhdanov and his father Artem stayed behind in Ukraine.
Were you surprised when Timur's teacher said, hey, we're going to continue online learning?
Honestly, yeah. I think that they're feeling this strong connection with Ukraine and then want to support us as much as they can, and also a new generation of Ukrainian people.
A new generation that may grow up in exile, relying on technology to stay connected to their homeland.
And Aaron, as inspiring as the commitment of these teachers is, there are limits. That young woman, Nadia, who fled to Poland, she is now a refugee living in the homes of a Polish family, and she recognizes that she's going to have to get a job now to try to make ends meet. So there may come a time where she won't be able to teach these kids, and that gets to the tragedy of 2.5 million people and growing who fled Ukraine. They've lost their homes, they've lost jobs and livelihoods, and that may mean an end to education as well.
It's unbelievable, too, and talk about the language barriers, too. Ivan, thank you so much. And as Ivan said, 2.5 million, I just kind of emphasize this every single night. That is just the beginning, everybody. There are 44 million people who live in Ukraine. And next, the war in Ukraine is pushing gas prices, of course, higher around the world. That has families cutting back on food and even pulling kids from daycare.
Mint Mobile figured out how to give you a whole year of service for half the price. So I asked Walker Scobell, the amazing actor playing half-size me in our new movie, to help me announce it.
I play a younger you, Ryan.
Yeah. But the half thing works better.
There are...
Are you okay?
My name is Kara Jackson, and this is my brief but spectacular take on writing what's under my nose.
And we thank you, Kara Jackson, and you can watch all of our brief but spectacular videos online at pbs.org/newshour/brief. And a short news update before we go. A Texas judge has blocked the state from investigating gender-confirming care for transgender youth as child abuse. And that is a News Hour for tonight. I'm Judy Woodruff. Join us online and again here on Monday evening. For all of us at the PBS News Hour, thank you. Please stay safe and have a good weekend.
Major funding for the PBS News Hour has been provided by...
The landscape has changed, and not for the last time.
Supplies for one Jewish family.
Inside Ukraine, where I am right now, more of the same. It's like in the worst of moments, the best of humanity show up. Everyone here that I see, they want only one thing: to take care of those women, of those children that are suffering the horrors of a war that doesn't make sense in the 21st century.
Yeah, and thank you for pointing out. I mean, this is
giant, enormous movement of women and children from their homes, and sometimes with just one little bag or one little backpack. And the idea of children not knowing where they're going to sleep, what they're going to eat, is so heartbreaking. When you think about the fact that you've done this all over the world, you've done this in wartime situations, but in this case, is it different that it is really kids? You're feeding kids for the most part, and their moms.
No, I mean, obviously, I don't have the exact data, but at one moment it seems that there is one child for each adult. It's a massive movement of children. We've seen images of children alone with a phone number written in the back of their hand. So if somebody finds them, to call their family to tell them he's fine. Imagine what their families have to go through to put sometimes children alone into those buses or those trains. This is what is really heartbreaking. We saw the bombing of a hospital in the south, if I'm right, in Mariupol, where many children die. Again, I hope everybody's going to be speaking up, not only the citizens of Europe, but the citizens of the world, saying there's no way that we can go through this war without speaking very loudly that we cannot allow Putin to get away with what is a massacre of biblical proportions. So obviously, an organization like ours, I wish I had to activate. We're not the only people feeding here. As I'm telling you, it's churches, everybody that can do something is doing something. Well, World Central Kitchen is just trying to bring some organization through these 4 or 5 countries that we are right now feeding, welcoming Ukrainians into the safety of those countries, or well feeding, as we are doing right now, inside Ukraine in multiple cities.
And can I ask you, just logistically, you don't have to tell us every bit of it, but is it getting more difficult to actually get the food to be able to cook, given the fact that Russia is indiscriminately bombarding everything, civilian infrastructure? Is it getting harder and harder to actually physically get the food to the people?
Well, obviously here in Lviv, we are what I would say far away from the front lines. But we are probably 400, 450 kilometers away, which seems far, but it's right there. These last 24 hours, we saw during the evening and into the day that you will hear the sirens because it seems a missile or an attack was happening somewhere. At the end, we had during the day today 2 attacks. I will not say very close to Lviv, but this is the attacks that they've been closer to the west, closer to the Polish border. And with that means the door is touching in almost every city. This keeps going like this. So food obviously is an issue. We're trying to preposition food in places like Odessa. We're trying to preposition a lot of food in places like Lviv, trying to prepare for the worst and hope for the best. And obviously we have partners in places like Kiev, restaurants that from the very beginning, they've been feeding women and children and elderly that they are scared and they are waiting in shelters or in tunnels or in basements when this shelling never stops. Obviously in places like Kiev, even still, it's food keeps coming with, I guess, the help of military and others in those cities that they're surrounded by the Russians. Food is getting very difficult. We see what's happening in Mariupol. We see other cities that they've been for days, if not already for weeks, surrounded by the Russian troops. And where at the end, who suffers is always the same. The men and women, very often the voiceless, very often the poor, and we cannot allow this. Let's hope that food is not one of the problems people are going to be going through. At the very least, people as they are living, we're trying to make sure that we go along the way until they get to safety, to make sure that in every stop, in every moment, food and water and all the things will be available to them without any effort.
God bless you, sir. People aspire to be a great man. Even better is to be a good man. You, sir, are both. Jose Andres, thank you. Thank you. And that is tonight's Readout. All In with Chris Hayes starts now.
Tonight on All In.
We're not going to give any more airtime to the lies that you're hearing today. It's beneath this council and there's only one aggressor here, and that is Russia.
Conflict, they assumed historic war powers. Without even pausing, the Biden administration declared total economic war on a sovereign country. No American had been killed. The United States had not been invaded or attacked. And yet, with no meaningful public debate or congressional authorization, the Biden administration destroyed that country's currency, then removed it from the international banking system, then
According to the regional governor, the local airport was hit by 4 bomber-fired missiles, doing substantial damage, killing 2 people. A military airfield about 150 miles south was also hit. Now, north of Kyiv, those artillery...
Us behind the headlines of the shocking story of murder and greed. NewsNation Prime starts right now.
Live from NewsNation headquarters, this is NewsNation Prime with Marnie Hughes.
And good evening to you. I'm Marnie Hughes. We begin tonight with new accusations from Ukraine that Russian troops have abducted a mayor in broad daylight. We have some video to show you just into the newsroom, and you can see right at the very top of your screen Russian soldiers walking a man out of an administrative building. Ukrainian officials say that man is Ivan Fedorov, the mayor of Melitopol. Just 4 days ago, Ukraine's president gave Fedorov an award called the Order of Courage for helping organize humanitarian efforts in his city, which is about 3 hours west of the site of that horrific hospital bombing that we all saw just days ago. This is the latest in a series of new actions today from Russia, with troops on the ground seeming to gain more momentum as they push closer to Ukraine's capital. Our team of correspondents and also retired Lieutenant General Richard Newton standing by as we are now in day 16 of this deadly battle and war. We begin with Robert Sherman tonight, live in western Ukraine. Robert.
Marnie, good evening. And we're seeing the battlefield expand. Western Ukrainian cities not far from where we are in Lviv are now being targeted, showing that there is no such thing as a safe city here in Ukraine. Day 16, Russian forces casting a wider net. Something has shifted, and few are sure what it means. That 40-mile convoy of tanks and other Russian weaponry is once again on the move after being stalled for days. Military strategists fear it is a reset and repost of troops and equipment. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy seemed unfazed today.
My country has reached a strategic turning point.
Zelenskyy wouldn't say what he meant. Aside from trying to take the Ukrainian capital of Kyiv and the port city of Mariupol, cities to the west and east are now under attack. The sights and sounds of war have now reached the large industrial city of Dnipro. Wisely, this man left Dnipro for the Romanian border just before the bombing in his city began.
It was very uncomfortable because we have this air raid sirens almost all the time, like 5 times a day or even more. And we have a curfew. We have a shortage of products in stores, so we decided to move because we have 4 kids.
But he was reluctant to leave.
It hurts me a lot because I'm half Russian, my mother is Russian, my father is Ukrainian, and I have relatives and friends in Russia. And this conflict hurts a lot. There is a lot of hatred to Russian people now.
And while the UN Refugee Agency reports 2.5 million people have left the country, many remain, helping anywhere they can. In Odessa, lessons in shooting a gun in one room. Next door, a different team making camouflage netting, all committed to defending their families, their homes, and their nation.
We will win it, so we have no other choice. So we want to live in the democratic country.
And the city that we're in right now, Lviv, Ukraine, has gotten through this conflict mostly unscathed. You talk to people here, though, they feel as though that it's just a matter of time before their city finds itself in the crosshairs of a Russian attack. Marnie?
in the face of the enemy, defending their democracy, defending their sovereignty. The resilience of the Ukrainian people, Robert, you've seen it firsthand, is beyond, I think, what any of us could have anticipated. We'll be seeing you again shortly. Thank you, as always. Retired Lieutenant General Richard Newton joining us now. He has more than 3 decades of military experience. Lieutenant General, as always, great to see you. I want to begin with this very troubling report tonight. We just shared that video breaking tonight, new for folks at home, of Russian troops essentially kidnapping, abducting this mayor in Ukraine, someone who had been applauded recently by the Ukrainian president for his efforts in keeping people safe. What do you make of this news tonight?
Well, I make of this news, Marty, as just typical Soviet tactics. As we are watching now on our screen, this is the Russian soldiers going in and, taking prisoner of this mayor. And he was targeted, obviously, because of the high praise he'd received from certainly President Zelenskyy, but how he's been striving to, protect his people. And then he's now as a prisoner with the Russian army.
The other troubling development today was Russian forces conducting airstrikes in western Ukraine. We know they've been really focused in the east. They're also recruiting volunteers from Syria. Russia is to join in the fight. Talk about the strategy and tactics behind that and how that changes how the Ukrainians defend themselves.
Well, the center of the fight, the center of effort is still Kyiv. That Russian convoy that we mentioned, or we've been watching for the last several nights, is now just about 10 miles north of the city. But they have expanded the fight, certainly from the air to the western part of Ukraine. I don't believe it's really strategically significant at this time, but it has shown that they have expanded their reach as best they possibly can. They are recruiting former fighters who've been on the side of Russian conflicts, as you mentioned, in Syria, and also former fighters in Chechnya and so forth. So that doesn't surprise me either. But nonetheless, we're up for a heck of a fight now, I think, as that convoy marches closer to Kyiv, certainly over the next 7 to 10 days.
Maybe the bloodiest yet. Lieutenant General, I want to talk about Russia's military muscle. You know better than most, specifically when it comes to the air power. What do we know about Putin's forces now that we didn't know at the start of this 2 weeks ago?
Well, what we know, Marty, is at this moment, 100% of his forces that were part of the invasion are now in Ukraine. And so my sources tell me that there's no really effort to bring in new forces, such as soldiers and so forth, other than the recruiting of those that you mentioned at the top of the hour from Syria and elsewhere. I think you're going to see an expansion of his air capabilities, as I've mentioned before in the show. I flew with the Russian Air Force, and I know they've got some modicum of capability. But let's back up just a little bit. Our thoughts, I was part of this thought process as well, as we thought the Russians were 6'5" or 7 feet, to put it in a basketball vernacular. But we've discovered through this attack and this invasion, he stalled off his timeline, that Russian army may be just about 5'5", but still they're very lethal. And it would not surprise me, it hasn't surprised us to this point now, that they've gone after these civilian targets and the atrocities and so forth. So you're going to see more blunt instruments of power. But again, the Russian forces are just not as effective as perhaps we would have thought prior to February 24th.
Well, if you're going to put it in basketball terms, the Ukrainians are scrappy, so my money's on them at this point. You say all the instruments of national power are being used right now simultaneously. What does that mean?
What that means is if you look across, and this is broadly speaking, but there's 4 key elements of national power or national security. There's the diplomatic, there's the information or intelligence, there's certainly the military, and then there's the economic and finance. And what we've seen, for instance, with Vice President Harris visiting Poland and Romania yesterday was significant. That's a very strong diplomatic effort, not only for her to engage the Poles directly, but also to show that the United States is very much supporting and trying to keep NATO unified. And then there's other elements that are playing simultaneously. We may not necessarily see them. We generally focus on the diplomatic and the military piece of this, the deployment of forces, and they're moving the 2 Patriot batteries into Poland and so forth. But they're all happening simultaneously 24/7.
If Putin believes he's losing this war, what then?
Boy, that's a tough question, and really only Putin knows that. It's very difficult to get into his mind, and he's got very, very small cadre of people around him. So, and I'm not even sure he's listening to their advice either. But if he believes, I think, this is my opinion, if he loses grip on the conflict, I think you'll see him resort to an escalation. Part of the Russian playbook is to escalate, to create a de-escalation, if you will. And that escalation could be the use of more atrocities against civilian targets, but also could be the use of chemical weapons and or tactical nuclear weapons as well. We don't want that to happen. That's why we're very sensitive, and the president's been very careful in terms of trying to not escalate this conflict. But that's the whole, that's the biggest challenge I think we face right now.
A very real threat. Lieutenant General Richard Newton, always good to see you. Thanks again.
Good evening, Marty.
As the days go on, more and more Ukrainians are trying to get somewhere safe, and the refugee crisis is growing before our eyes. Heartbreaking video tonight showing soldiers helping elderly people cross over a damaged bridge. There's some water running underneath them. These people have lived in Ukraine for their entire lives, and they are having to leave everything behind. The number of refugees now has surpassed 2.5 million people and counting by the day, by the hour, by the minute. Many of them heading to Eastern European countries as this war is now in its third week. They're going to need more and more help in the coming days, escaping danger and also finding a new way forward. Incredible sights tonight.
Dramatically, potash fertilizers, wheat, huge. Nickel went up 250% in 2 days.
Accusing people of things they're about to do themselves, there's some real reason to be worried. Ben Collins is a senior reporter for NBC News who spent years reporting extensively on online disinformation, and Edward Wong is a diplomatic and international correspondent of the New York Times. He's got a really good new piece on the U.S. efforts to fight that bioweapons disinformation promoted by Russia and China, and they both join me now. Edward, I got to say that was a remarkable scene in the UN today. In many directions, I hadn't quite ever seen anything quite like that. This Russian attempt to sort of introduce this into the record, Chinese sort of going along with it, everyone else just, almost apoplectic in diplomatic terms about what was happening. What happened today?
I think you see a lot of the diplomats expressing some form of fear that there might be an actual chemical attack that takes place on the ground in Ukraine, and it wouldn't be the Ukrainian forces doing that. They fear that it would be the Russian forces doing that. We saw this happen in the Syrian civil war when Assad used chemical weapons, and as we know, Russia strongly backed Assad in that war. And they put out the Assad government and Russian disinformation networks put out messaging that said that the opposition was using chemical weapons in that instance. So I think here we see a lot of anxiety coming out of the White House and coming out of other countries, saying that we need to be on the lookout for any potential Russian attacks using chemical weapons. And of course, China has been siding with Russia for the most part during this war, and they've been amplifying this disinformation this week.
Yeah, I've seen it even from Chinese state official state media accounts, Chinese officials sort of, tweeting around the edges or amplifying this. Ben, what's so striking to me is when you see it in real time, like no one was saying anything about anything having to do with like they have biological weapons on March 1st or, February 28th. All of a sudden it's like Fox News and the Russian ambassador, boom, right in the middle of the discourse.
Yeah, look, this is their second attempt to create a pretext for this war. It's very much post hoc, but that's exactly what's happening here. There's some really good data from this company called Pura that dives into the 15 largest far-right parts of the internet, places like the Donald, which is now called Patriots.win, which is where January 6th, the Capitol riots were pretty much staged on the internet. Places like the Great Awakening, which is a QAnon forum. They have this really startling data that shows there are single-digit posts about biolabs anywhere until February 22nd, which is the day that February 24th, which is the day that Russia began its invasion into Ukraine. There was nothing in the pretext of this war, but people found this one post. It was an English language conspiracy theory. It was an American conspiracy theory. And you saw in the last couple of days, another data company called Signal Labs said that in the last couple of days, there were more Russian language posts than English language posts about biolabs on these far-right spaces on the internet. It just overtook it in the last couple of days. They used the American far right to create a better pretext for themselves because no one was buying the neo-Nazi thing because now everyone knows that Zelenskyy is half Jewish. So now they had to come up with this secondary thing, and it uses the cadence and the rhythm and the structure of the COVID-19 conspiracy theories. You can just take the same bad guys and implant them into this one.
Yeah, and Edward, you made the point about having seen this in Syria, of course, where again this preposterous propaganda got circulated that the Syrian rebels had either gassed themselves or accidentally gassed or staged, sometimes all of those same claims being made adjacent to each other, even though they were mutually logically exclusive. And there's real concern in Washington. There's real question about what China is doing here and their bearing on this. There's been some really interesting reporting. They were taken by surprise by it, maybe not quite 100% behind this, but also publicly kind of tilting towards Russia. You write this: the Chinese government's promotion of Russian disinformation in the middle of the war has ignited concern among Western officials because of China's powerful diplomatic standing and extensive cyber abilities. Analysts who study disinformation from the two nations said this was the first time they had seen this scale of amplification between Beijing and Moscow around a conspiracy theory. What's the significance of that?
Well, before, China had been amplifying disinformation from the Kremlin, but it's mostly about policy, is amplifying Kremlin talking points about NATO and about NATO enlargement. And here we see an actual conspiracy theory being put out using the Chinese megaphone. They're doing it from the very highest levels of the foreign ministry. The spokespeople for foreign ministry are getting out there at news conferences in Beijing talking about this conspiracy theory. And in a way, China's trying to take revenge for what happened at the beginning of the pandemic when the Trump administration started raising this Wuhan Virology Institute theory saying the pandemic might have started there. So they're trying to hit back at the U.S. for that.
Of course, that makes good sense. Ben, there's a reporting today in the Washington Post that the White House has actually been reaching out to TikTok influencers to brief them. I have noticed Ukraine stuff coming up in the TikTok algorithm. There's a lot of content there that is obviously another important sort of like battle space in the information war.
Yeah, it's enormously important, in part because the Russians are paying people on TikTok overtly. They're just handing over cash, which they are organizing on places like Google Docs to push Russian talking points, such as the biolab conspiracy theory. So from what I can tell, the Biden administration scheduled a Zoom call with 30-some Americans, and they got them all together and they said, here's what we're seeing, here's where this is going. So look, this is the next stage of this kind of information warfare. You have to get people to pay attention. This is, there's propaganda on all sides of this thing, but this is what we're going to see in the future.
Yeah, attention is everything. Ben Collins and Edward Wong, thank you both. Still to come tonight, Vladimir Putin's information crackdown. How much news is really getting through to Russian citizens? Plus, President Zelenskyy demands the release of an elected official who was allegedly kidnapped by Russian troops. The latest from the ongoing siege in Ukraine just ahead.
They need to get underground. There could be a Russian strike or a missile coming in. In recent days, those missiles have hit cities across this country. But officials here do believe in the coming days the attacks toward Kyiv will get heavier and heavier. And it's part of the reason this city is bracing. We were in the streets today and we saw nearly every block has a checkpoint with soldiers. They're dug in on the sides of the road. They're preparing for the Russian advance toward this city. But that artillery again in the distance tonight indicating the Russians are not just hitting this city from the northwest, but also from the north and from the east. Tucker?
Trainings for us in Ukraine tonight. Thanks so much for that. So you often heard people say in Washington, many Republicans, by the way, that Joe Biden is weak on Putin. Well, of course, that's ridiculous. It's total propaganda designed to push the administration toward war. Joe Biden is stupid on Putin. He's weak on everything else.
I think you had raised some questions about the capabilities of Russia to actually encircle the city. What do you think is going on now?
Yeah, well, first, Anderson, Clarissa's report was very good when she was saying she heard repeated booms. Having been a tanker all my life, living close to tank range on various forts in the United States and in Europe, those were probably tank battles, truthfully, or tanks against anti-tank weapon systems, which we have repeatedly seen evidence of. She then talked about, the siege, and I geeked out on you a little bit tonight, Anderson, and looked up our doctrinal definition of a siege, and it's a military blockade of a city or a fortified place to compel forces within to surrender due to persistent or serious attacks. Now, let's talk a little bit about Kyiv itself. There's a 30-mile circumference around the city of Kyiv. It's an absolutely beautiful city with a river, the Dnieper, right down the middle, and a population of 3 million people at the start of the campaign. They probably have 2 million there now. What we have seen is that the Russian forces have repeatedly attempted to close on the city, in other words, approach the city. But we have now been reporting for 3 days that they are 10 miles away. That tells me they are either taking an operational pause to get resupplied, which I doubt, because the Ukrainian forces are talking about how they are continually attacking those forces, and those are the booms you hear in the background. I've seen pictures of Ukrainian soldiers today, films of them. Every single one of them has an anti-tank weapon system strapped across their back. So they are conducting operations against a column that has been somewhat dysfunctional and incompetent in terms of getting the last 10 miles to a city with a supply line that is non-existent right now. So I think from what I'm seeing, they're coming from the northeast, the northwest, and potentially the east, where the Russian forces have not driven that far. So they are not going to be able to encircle that 30-mile perimeter anytime soon.
General Zwack, do you think it likely that given the now fortifications that are said to be in Kyiv and because of the bravery and the hard fight that the Ukrainians have been putting up, it's given time for forces inside Kyiv to build up defenses? Do you think the Russians will try to enter the city or just spend some time, I guess in their terms, softening it up, just pounding it, destroying buildings, making life as miserable as possible, and trying to kill as many people and deprive as many people from airstrikes or artillery strikes?
Yeah, Anderson, let me try to draw a picture. I'm trying to see the Russian set. Yes, they have been they have begun to unravel, if you will, their column, their long supply line. By the way, those soldiers were frozen if they've been out there in their trucks and vehicles for the last 8 days. So they had to disperse just to get the place and maybe fight for a village to get some warmth. Okay, the siege. As I see it, the Russians are working their tentacles around the city, and it's bloody. It's been bloodier than they thought. But while they're besieging inward, they've also now got to cover their backside to clearly Ukrainian light fighting units, stay-behind units, even partisans who are going to be ravaging the backside of the siege as it looks into Kyiv. So the Russians are actually going to find themselves in the unenviable position of having to fight both sides. I think that this is too big a mission. If they sit out there for a week or two trying to besiege, they're going to be death from 1,000 cuts, and it's already happening. They don't have the forces, it seems, to, in a muscular way, mount a major effort into the city, and the troops are exhausted, and they're cold, and they're miserable, and their morale is probably down, even if they've been stiffened by Rosgvardia, National Guard units, and mercenaries.
So, General Hurling, what do they do?
Well, they will do exactly as you say, Anderson. They will continue to attempt to encircle the city. I don't believe they'll be successful in doing that. So they may begin the bombardment with missiles, artillery, and rockets. The Russians have not been able to fly their Air Force as much as they would have liked to. The Ukrainian Air Force is putting up a great fight as well. They are doing a much better job than I anticipated. And I'll summarize, the way I see this. I thought the Ukraine Army and their territorial forces were going to do very well. They've done much better than I anticipated they would. I thought the Russians were going to suck. They suck even more than I anticipated. They are not doing well at all. They just had another commander killed today, a 2-star general, the head of the 29th Combined Arms Army. That tells me they're trying to get their leadership to the front, to unscrew their convoys, to unscrew their tactics, and they're exposing themselves to fire. So you've seen not only the repeated killing and destruction and abandonment of equipment and the killing of Russian soldiers. I would guess that the casualty rate is much higher than any report has come in, and the desertion rates and the capture rates of the Russian army are much higher. And we can tell because Mr. Putin is trying to get Syrian mercenaries to come in, and he's mobilizing some of his guard as replacement. So all of those things point to me that this continues to be bad, and it's going to be worse for the Russians. The key point is, can the Ukrainian forces hold out? Are the people going to be killed, the civilian population, with continued war crimes by Mr. Putin and his forces? Those are the key factors will determine the outcome.
General Mark Hurley and General Peter Zwack, I appreciate your perspectives. Thank you. When we return, we're going to go back to our Clarissa Ward. She's in a report from Irpin, just outside Kyiv. She's going to bring us some scenes of what is happening there, the destruction. She tries to help a woman in America find her mother trapped in the fighting outside Ukraine's capital. It's a remarkable story we want you to see just ahead.
Shopping channels and now even banks have tried canceling myself and my pill.
And then there's this Ukrainian who declined to give us his name, but remembers the day Ukraine became an independent nation. He has no intention of living under Soviet rule again and believes the future of the West depends on what happens now.
We are a buffer zone for all of Europe. If we fail, the whole of Europe will fail. If Ukraine exists, the world exists.
In East Ukraine, cities such as Kharkiv and Kyiv have been bearing the brunt of the bombings. Out west, things have been much more stable, but we've seen the determination of Ukrainians and Eastern Europeans on full display. Some have been packaging food to send off east. Others have been listening in the Ukrainian National Guard to protect their communities. Everyone is involved. Thomas wants the Western world to know that no act is too small.
Everybody can help, everybody can do something.
For Tatiana, the thought of better days is pushing her forward.
I believe that everything will be okay, and that this nightmare will end and my children will have a bright future.
And for others, no matter what the next few days hold, they're prepared to dig their heels into the Ukrainian soil.
The flag was raised here in 1989, and I have to protect it. I'm not going anywhere because you cannot pick your mother and you cannot pick your motherland.
And what you've seen on the ground here is people picking up weapons for the first time in their lives, people volunteering for the first time in their lives. The main mindset down here is that there is no other option except for victory. Marnie?
The Ukrainian people literally, Robert, carrying the weight of the world on their shoulders right now in defense of their homeland. As always, be safe. We'll be seeing you. Thank you. Nazar Zinchuk is a student at Franco National University in Lviv, and he is joining us live tonight. Nazar, thank you for giving us some of your time.
Yes, thank you.
How old are you?
I'm 22 years old.
And where are you from?
I'm from Transcarpathia region. It's like a city of Uzhhorod, but now I'm staying in Lviv, and I'm trying to do something to help my nation and my society where I live now.
What are you doing?
Actually, now we have our Telegram channel. It's like you can join us, like pointing in Google, lvweb.com. It's like Ukrainian Freedom News, and we are trying to share our Ukrainian position on everything what is happening here, and because we can see like there are many fields, information fields in the world. It's like Russian propaganda, it's like Western